Guys, welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'll get you started here today. As you guys notice, I'm going to do the Better Bachelor intro instead of my usual odd man out because I'm recording this. I'm going to put this over on YouTube as well, simply because this is something that everybody needs to know about, and this affects men probably more than anybody because we're the majority of business owners and people that get credit and people that buy homes and people that put money into the economy. And to be honest with you, I'm not an expert on this stuff, all right, just so you guys know. But it is something that I want to talk about and at least put the knowledge into your head so you can start doing your own research. So you can start looking into ESG, which is problematic at best. The environmental, the social governance. Because businesses, corporations are doing it. So whether you vote one way or another, whether you're in a country like Canada or the United States or the UK or Australia or even places like the Philippines or Thailand or South Korea, doesn't matter. If you use a business, if you use a corporation, if you use a bank, you're going to be in trouble. And I'm going to tell you why. As we go through this stuff. A couple of things. So it's going to be basically socialism, but it's going to be through businesses. It's going to be through, again, the banking industry. So let me jump. We'll get right into it here. A couple of announcements here. So the YouTube CEO is urging governments to outlaw harmful speech. Since YouTube and Google is based here in the United States, they have to follow the laws. Well, they don't have to, but they're supposed to follow the laws as far as free speech and being able to let people speak their minds. Well, YouTube is asking the governments to change the laws so that YouTube can tailor the content that you get. So if you haven't joined alternative media, you may need to soon if you want to find out all the news, because eventually doing news stories like this one will not be allowed. And to give you an idea of how they go about this, well, the Canadian Broadcasting Channel, CBC and CTV news journalists targeted the donors to the freedom protests, the trucking protests that they've got going on right now. And the way they did that is they attacked Give, Send, Go. They hit them with a DDoS or DDoS, denial of service attack. They went down, they came back up, then they were attacked and their database got breached, and they found out all the donors and their names and their credit information of who gave to the trucking protest, and Twitter allowed it, even though terms of service on Twitter say you cannot post hacked material. Twitter allowed it to stay up. Why? Because it follows the vein of information that they want. They're fine with truckers getting, and people that donated to that being outed. But if they did this to a different type of group, I'm sure it would be taken down. So now you've got the news media for a country, Canada, and when the bug hit, they were given bailouts by the government, and now they're doing the government's dirty work. This is Pravda type stuff, okay? And again, no matter how you feel about it, understand, even if you're against the trucking protest and you're all in on Trudeau, understand they will use this against you someday. Just understand it. Just understand, because eventually they're going to cross a line that you don't like, and they're going to use it against you. And so they've gone after these people, and they're publicly listing and shaming them and calling them out. And the result of that, from the Toronto Star, a Tory staffer suddenly departs Queen's Park after donating $100. So they gave $100, and they went after people in the government that were supporting this. This is the fascism and the socialism that everybody screams that they're scared of. Here you've got hackers going in to a crowdfunding site, getting the information, passing it off to the government, passing it off to news media to contact these people, to shame them, to out them. It's here. Like, this is here. Understand that. And again, you may be all on board against the truckers, and you may think, oh, these mandates are wonderful. Doesn't matter. It may be working for you this time around, but it won't next time. I'm telling you that. Understand that. Because if the governments keep taking away your freedoms and keep taking away your rights and keep locking down what you can or cannot hear or say or do, eventually you're going to want to protest. And then you're going to find the news media and the government is against you. And if it can happen in Canada, it can happen in the U.S., it can happen in basically any country. So let's talk about ESG. This is from Investopedia. And again, I'm not claiming I'm the arbiter of all the correct news on this. But I want you to know what's going on, and then you can do your own research, and then you can look into this stuff, and then you can understand where it's going. And this is how if you're a person that's in the United States, or you're a person that's in Japan, or you're a person that's in wherever, South Africa, it doesn't matter. If you use business, banking, corporations, any of that stuff, if you have a Google phone, Android phone, Apple phone, Nike pair of sneakers, you do banking, you do investing, all of that is going to be affected. That is everything, everything. So what is ESG? Environmental, social, and governance criteria. And I'm going to play a clip first. Let me play this clip first. This is from Blaze TV. This is from Glenn Beck. And he's going to sum it up here in about 2.5 minutes. I want you to hear this so you have just a quick overview. And then as I read this, you'll see how not only is he correct, but how it is going to affect you. I'll try to keep this relatively short. I don't want to go on for my usual 1 or 2 hours, but I want to give a quick laydown so you guys, because I make sure to share this stuff, whether it's my video or one that's similar. Let's listen to Glenn Beck. He'll explain it real quick.
Here's how the formula actually works. The Fed prints as much money, and this is not just our Fed, this is central banks. The Fed just keeps printing money. Ever wonder why the stock market did so well when every business was closed? Yeah. So the Fed, which is the biggest banks in the country, they print as much money, and then they give that to Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, Citi, and others, okay? And then they give that money to places like BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard, who are saying, you know, we only want to do business with companies that are woke. So then they give that money either in stock or, you know, they just come in and take over the country. They take the money that they've been given by the banks, which were given that by themselves at the Fed. And then what happens? All of these companies, they're all awash. Their stocks are doing great. And the largest investors in the company are these guys. They hold enormous leverage over the country, over the companies. And they say, like BlackRock, you know what? You're going to have to be a woke company. I mean, we have a lot of trust in you, but you'll be dangerous. You'll be dangerous. So investors put public pressure on, let's say, Apple to do a civil rights audit. Well, Apple CEO Tim Cook gets the message. He responds very lightning speed soon with a $100 million project called the Racial Equity and Justice Initiative. Now that's $100 million, not to make or improve iPhones, but to solve racial equity. That's how it works. And once a company has been brought in line through woke investor pressure, they're kept in check through ESG because, well, let's get rid of these investors. No, the banks have the standards too. That's what ESG is for. And no matter how they try to spin it, it is an enforcement mechanism for authoritarianism, period. That's it.
All right, so that's a brief overview of this. So I'm going to read down ESG quickly here, and then I'm going to show you how, if you use Visa, MasterCard, if you support the Second Amendment, if you like to have an occasional drink on the weekends, if you buy a product that maybe isn't part of this ESG group, your score will go down. And why that matters is this is a way to control populations, what they do, who they vote for, what they support, and eventually you can be unpersoned. And just this is what they do over in the CCP. So of course, they're going to try to make this sound as if this is a good thing, that they're going to save the world and fix problems. But understand, anybody that says, now, they haven't been able to fix all the problems in the world up to this point. So that how do they think, you know, if San Francisco can't fix its own its own homeless population problem. If San Francisco can't get it right, how do you think the world is going to get it right? Well, this is from Investopedia. Environmental, Social, and Governance, ESG criteria. What is ESG? Environmental, Social, and Governance criteria is a set of standards for a company operations that socially conscious investors use to screen potential investments. Environmental criteria consider how a company performs as a steward of nature. Social criteria examine how it manages relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities where it operates. Governance deals with a company, leadership, executive pay, audits, internal controls, and shareholders' rights. They say investors, notably younger generations, have in recent years shown interest in putting their money where their values are. As a result, brokerage firms and mutual fund companies have started offering exchange-traded funds, ETFs, and other financial products that follow ESG criteria. Do you know how we know this is crap? Because the youngest generation right now cannot afford to buy homes. They're struggling to pay rent. They're starting families later because they can't afford it. So and they're not they're not buying homes. They don't have the income to invest. So how is it that they say, well, it's the younger generation that's asking for this, so we're going to do it because they're our investors, when we know they're not? And I know this firsthand because I went out looking for homes. And as many people have said, because I'm doing this live here on Locals, as many people have said, they've been outbid on homes by BlackRock. When I was a home owner in 2015, I think I sold my house. I listed my home up for sale, and it was listed very high because the market was coming back. And a company came in and purchased it, and they flipped it, and they put it up for rent. And something interesting I noticed is in the couple of years that I lived in the area before I moved, and I had sold my home because I was getting ready to move, but I ended up staying an extra year or two. What I noticed is there were a lot of homes that were up for rent that used to be people that owned them. So when they sold, companies come in like BlackRock and others, they purchase them, and then they rent them out. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. So we know it's not the young people that are asking for this, but the companies are doing it so they can control you. We'll continue on. Robo-advisors such as Betterment and Wealthfront have used them to appeal to these investors. According to the most recent report from US SIF Foundation, investors held $17.1 trillion in assets chosen according to ESG criteria at the beginning of 2020, up from $12 trillion just 2 years earlier. Now, to give you an idea, the federal debt here in the United States is $30 trillion. That is a massive amount of money. 17 trillion people, or $17 trillion are of investments are based on ESG criteria. In another couple of years, if they continue at this trend, then basically the investments being held by ESG corporations will equal the U.S. national debt. Now, at some point, these companies could pay off the U.S. national debt, and basically then at that point they would own the debt of the United States. ESG investing is sometimes referred to as sustainable investing, and they say the types of environmental, social, and governance criteria. Environmental criteria may include a company's energy use, waste, pollution, natural resource conservation, and treatment of animals. The criteria can also be used in evaluating any environmental risks a company might face and how the company is managing those risks. For example, there might be issues related to its ownership of contaminated land, its disposal of hazardous waste, its management of toxic emissions, or its compliance with government environmental regulations. Now, you may say, well, that's a good thing. I don't want them polluting the environment. But remember something. They consider anything that, like pig farms, cow farms, other types of farms, well, those animals produce methane, you see, and that is against the environment. So if you're a farmer and maybe want to get a loan to start a farm, you may be denied because you might have animals on it. And remember, they say here, treatment of animals. That may mean that a milk farm or a dairy farm, a meat processing plant, those may not be environmentally friendly, and they certainly don't treat animals well, so you can't have that anymore. In other words, beef, pork, chicken, milk, eggs, they may become less available or extremely expensive. Why do you think there's so many stories out there about eating bugs and living in pods? That's what part of what they're talking about here. And again, even if you say on a personal level, well, I don't care, I'm still going to eat meat and I'm still going to drink milk, and I'm not, it may not be available for you if they don't allow companies to get started where they can produce or make these things. So it just may not be available for you. Social criteria look at the company's business relationships. Does it work with suppliers that hold the same values as it claims to hold? Does the company donate a percentage of its profits to the local community or encourage employees to perform volunteer work there? Do the company's working conditions show high regard for its employees' health and safety? Are other stakeholders' interests taken into account? Now, again, this may sound all great on the surface, but what if the company that you're working for and doing your 40 hours a week, what if to meet their ESG scores, they come to you and say, we need X amount or X percentage of employees to do volunteer work, and you've been selected for volunteer work. So we need you to go down and help build habitats for humanity, or go down and work at a soup kitchen for the weekend. You won't be paid for this, of course. We're not going to give you any money for it. It's volunteer work. And if you don't volunteer, we're going to have to let you go because we need to meet certain criteria. Again, you can say, well, that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen. But is it? Again, your employment may be based upon these social credit scores. What if you are a white male? You have the least score value when it comes to working for a company, which means that they're going to ask for other representation to work for them before you, no matter how qualified you are, because you are maybe only worth 0.3, where someone that has is part of the alphabet community and maybe a minority and maybe something else is worth 2.4 on the social scale. Therefore, you will be the last to be taken in and given a job. What about governance? Governance, investors may want to know that a company uses accurate and transparent accounting methods and that stockholders are allowed to vote on important issues. But remember, the stockholders are going to be majority BlackRock, Vanguard, and these other companies. So they're going to have the majority vote. And they want to make sure that they're allowed to vote on important issues. Do you think a person that maybe owns 100 shares of McDonald's out of the hundreds of thousands or millions of shares, do you think you're going to be given a vote? No, of course not. Of course not. And if you're a company owner now, you may get letters in the mail that tell you, hey, select here and vote based on a number of your shares. But that is all they have to do. Whoever BlackRock or these other companies that own 20, 30, 40% of a corporation, all they have to do is go, this is what we want, and that's going to be the majority of the votes. They say they may also want assurances that the companies avoid conflicts of interest in their choice of board members, don't use political contributions to obtain unduly favorable treatment, and of course, don't engage in illegal practices. No single company may pass every test in every category, of course, so investors need to decide what's most important to them and do their research. But again, who's the majority of the investor? The BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the banking systems. Now, something else that's kind of important here is, remember, they say, well, they don't use political contributions. And so our politicians cannot get involved in this. And you may say, well, that's a good thing. But what happens when they start doing something that is illegal or that is against our Constitution here in the United States or the Charter of Rights in Canada or whatever your government has? What happens when they start doing something that is illegal? It's going to make it very hard for politicians to come in and affect that. This is going to be businesses that are basically deciding the societal future of us. And for those that are capitalists, the capitalist system works with checks and balances. But obviously, if you let these major corporations come in and take over, we're going to have problems. And many people, even those that support capitalism, have problems with the super huge donations that these companies can give to politicians. I'm not saying anything's perfect, but this is going to basically be corporate socialism. And now, even if you go whether it's corporate socialism or regular socialism, either one's not good. It just takes away your freedoms. They say special considerations on a practical level, investment firms that follow ESG criteria must also set priorities. For example, Boston-based Trillium Asset Management, with $4.8 billion under management as of September 2021, uses a selection of ESG factors to help identify companies positioned for strong-term performance. So in other words, if you're getting an ETF or you're doing some investing and you decide to invest in an ETF, that ETF may ignore companies that might maybe be a good financial fit for you, but they don't follow ESG guidelines, which means those companies don't get recommended investors. So they will never have their stock growth. And eventually, if they don't meet other criteria, they will be forced out of the market. And so it boils down to, are you ESG or are you going to be forced out of the market? Now, who controls this? The banks and BlackRock, Vanguard, other places like that. Well, who controls them? That's the real question. That's the real question. And again, I haven't drilled down that far into this yet, but I want you to know what's coming, again, so you guys can do your homework on this stuff. They say companies that operate in higher risk areas or have exposure to coal or hard rock mining, nuclear or coal power, private prisons, agricultural biotechnology, tobacco, tar sands, or weapons and firearms, or companies that have major or recent controversies with human rights, animal welfare, environmental concerns, governance issues, or product safety. Now, what does that mean, controversies? Well, that means if a story comes out and it's salacious and it may look bad on a company, their ESG score comes down. Remember, though, it's just the controversy. It doesn't mean if they've actually been found of doing wrong. And if they haven't been found of wrongdoing, but there's a controversy or there's bad stories that come out against them, well, then they may lose their score and be dropped out of society. And if that's part of your business or that's a vendor that supplies you as a manufacturer, now you're in trouble. This is how they're going to force everybody to cooperate. And again, right here you can see agricultural biotechnology. That is food. That is how you feed the people. That is farms. And if you are involved in exposure to coal, hard rock mining, nuclear, or coal power, well, that's the vast majority of power for the world. The only thing that wouldn't fall into that, maybe natural gas. And, of course, they don't mention oil here, but, of course, that would be part of it. So that leaves what, wind power and solar power? But how does that work when to get wind and solar, you need to get, and all these electric cars and everything else, you need to dig up lithium and other rare earth minerals. All of it wouldn't fall into this, but what they'll do is they'll select and choose which ones they find allowable and not. Environment, companies that put out carbon and sustainability reports, limits harmful pollutants and chemicals. Seeks to lower greenhouse gas emissions, uses renewable energy sources. Well, those are all first world countries. What happens to the Philippines and maybe China, or the Philippines or Thailand or India or these other companies or countries that have to use lower tiers of energy? Well, they will be punished. They'll be punished. Social, companies that operate an ethical supply chain. What's that mean? We don't know. Doesn't matter. They'll decide later. Supports the alphabet rights and encourages diversity. Well, there goes the Middle East. There goes most religious countries. Very strong religious countries. Has policies to protect against misconduct. Pays fair wages. Do you think that they're going to talk about the CCP when it comes to that? No. Governance, companies that embrace diversity on their board, embraces corporate transparency, employs a CEO independent of their board chair. Now let's dive in a little bit. What are some of the examples? ESG alert. This is from Forbes. As sustainability regulations become stricter, can banks keep up? Banks are under rising pressure to meet evolving ESG goals. Consumers, now again, they say consumers are demanding this, but they're not. Again, it is the BlackRocks, it is the Vanguards, it is these companies. But they are consumers, you see, technically, because they use the banks. So that's the wordplay that they use. Consumers are demanding that their banks conduct business with an eye towards social justice and ecological sustainability. Stakeholders, there's that key word again, the BlackRocks, the Vanguards. Stakeholders increasingly expect investment decisions that weigh the impact on the environment. And new government regulations globally will extend to supplier compliance and visibility on ESG reporting on climate risks and social impacts. In recent months, I've read that the United States Securities and Exchange Commission may soon require ESG disclosures by financial institutions. In an executive order earlier this year, President Biden directed federal agencies to identify climate risks and create disclosure rules for finance. A proposed resolution in the U.S. House of Representatives requires systematically important bank holding companies to publicly disclose details about social impact of their operations, including progress on reaching targets for climate emissions reduction. Again, this is thanks to President Houseplant, and they're pressuring banks to fall in line. And they say, again, it's stockholders. But remember, the money that's going to BlackRock and these other investors that is then getting put into large corporations, those large corporations are then now looking at what banks to deal with. They say peering into your supply chain. That right there is a pretty creepy language. Meeting these challenges requires insight from both inside and outside your institution. In other words, you need to better understand sustainability efforts and results not just in your own business, but that of your suppliers. That requires supply chain transparency, including information on how your suppliers meet their ESG goals. This desire for insight extends from first-tier suppliers to second, third, and even fourth-tier suppliers in some parts of the finance industry. Again, this is going to trickle down to everybody, everyone. So your business will be forced to buy from certain companies that meet this criteria. And they will be forced to buy from other companies. So that means that, say, for example, your steel, maybe you're a trailer manufacturer. Well, the steel company is going to have to meet these goals. And a competing steel manufacturer, they may say they don't. And so that competitor goes away. Now you can only get your steel from just a couple companies. But they have to pay heavy regulations because they use coal to make the steel. And so the cost goes up. And competition goes away because they're not meeting the ESG score. So then you're forced to deal from just one or two steel manufacturers. And they will send it to a site that will make the steel tubes that you may use in your trailers. Well, they have to use this. And then the company that sells the trailers, they have to use this. And what it's going to do is it's going to whittle down supply, increase demand, and it's going to throw everything into chaos. And there's more on this. Again, I don't want to make this go on forever, but I want you to know what's going on. Because as we've printed all this money, as we've ramped up inflation, as as we're now $30 trillion in debt, as we've spiked the M1 monetary funds, understand there is a point of no return where you cannot correct this. And when that happens, we're probably going to have to move away from the dollar, because the only way the dollar's been able to hold its strength is because it is tied to the petrodollar or petroleum. But if China takes over that, segment, the dollar will fall off a cliff. And the way that they can come around and save this is, again, similar to what Venezuela and other countries have done, where they lop off a whole bunch of zeros off the end of it. And so what they'll do is they'll come out with the Fed coin or the U.S. Treasury coin, and that'll be your new monetary fund. And it'll be all digital. Why? Because then they can digitally shut it off. They can just take your account and say, click, you didn't meet your ESG scores. You are no longer allowed to do banking. We are seizing your funds. You're out of business. And if you don't believe me, look at what Canada just did, seizing the funds of the trucking protesters, going to their banks and saying, you need to lock their accounts. They're not allowed to have money anymore. But they can still hand cash to each other. They can still barter. They can still go down and say, hey, I got a bunch of muffins, and I'll give you some muffins. They can still do that with cash, but what if there is no more cash? What if it's all gone digital? Then they can say, anybody that's on this cell phone tower in this area, shut off all their money. Shut it off. So then if you walk into that area, your cell phone loses reception. You can't communicate anymore. So you can't go up to somebody else and transfer funds. Or if you transfer into them, anybody that's in this cell phone tower, your banking account is now frozen, and there is no more cash anymore. And a lot of this sounds like conspiracy theory stuff, but go back to what was conspiracy theory 2 years ago, 2 months ago. If I came to you and say, hey, there's going to be a peaceful protest, and the Canadian government is going to basically say that they're part of a terror network and all their banking things are going to be frozen, and they're going to force tow truck drivers to work against their will to remove these trucks, and they may jail these people and put $100,000 fines on them and ruin their businesses so they can't eat and give livelihood anymore, you would have called me crazy 2 months ago. But this is how quickly this can escalate. And I'm not saying, this is not like fear-mongering. I'm not trying to make you scared. I'm trying to let you know what they're trying to implement so that when you do banking or other things, you can ask about this and you can put pressure back on that company. Moving on. So this is from the Impact Investor, and they lay it out a little bit more. Companies can use ESG principles as a framework that enables them to work toward better corporate citizenship practices that improve the world around them. They say this is usually a complex and well-thought-out process. I bet it is, during which a corporate social responsibility or corporate sustainability team carefully analyzes what aims a business should have, as well as how to implement the company's overall goals. Now, remember, these are not people that you vote for. These are people that just get hired. Consumers and investors alike can, on the other hand, use a company's commitment to ESG principles as a guide. As more and more investors place a strong emphasis on wanting to invest only in businesses that share their personal values and their vision for creating a better world, tools are also being put in place to help them on this quest. So they're going to be putting in tools that track you. Understand that. Now, this is from the Impact Investor again, and I took a snapshot of this because I wanted to make sure to highlight this. They say, do I, as a person, have an ESG score? You may know all about your credit score, but an individual ESG score is still rather new. Many mainstream financial institutions are creating a new platform that is centered on ESG scores. So this is going to affect you personally. They say in addition to creating this platform, their lending guidelines are also getting an update that includes new rules that will tie your individual ESG score to your ability to secure lending. So in other words, if you are not a good ESG person, maybe you're very religious and aren't fully supportive of the alphabet community. Maybe you're a white person. Maybe you made the wrong post on social media. Maybe you gave to the wrong cause. Maybe you spoke your mind. You may not be able to get lending. So no more, you can't purchase a car anymore. You can't have a credit card anymore. You can't buy a home anymore. They say, being that it is still new, there's not too much that is completely known about how it will be used, and what regulations will improve or correct your score. I got a dog that's snoring over here next to me. I had to poke him a little bit. Okay, so what else? Buying a gun or alcohol or even clothing will all affect your overall ESG score. Not only will your purchases matter, but who you purchase from and how they do business. Oh, we noticed that you've bought a lot of sugar this month. Your ESG score is dropping because that's unhealthy for you. Oh, we noticed that you bought a gym membership. Your ESG score is improving because that is healthy for you. Oh, but we noticed you didn't check into the gym as many times as you should have. Your ESG is going down. Oh, you bought tobacco or alcohol too many times last month. Your score went down. Now your score has gone so low you can't buy a plane ticket to go visit your family. You can't leave the country. You can't get a loan for your car. Your credit card limit has been lowered. Now, here's what's frightening, and this is why you need to know this stuff. I mean, all of it's frightening. But how about this? Your political affiliations also factor into your personal ESG score. Aside from the politics and governance, the party you support and even the person you vote for will make your score go up or down based on that person's actions, policies, and voting habits. If you don't like Biden and maybe Trump decides to run again, if this were in effect and you voted for Trump, your social score drops. Again, they're controlling what you can buy, who you can vote for, and they'll say, no, you're free to vote for whoever you want. There's just some punishments for that. You can no longer buy an Apple iPhone. You have to buy a generic flip phone that doesn't have texting or apps. It sounds silly, but it's right here in the writing. And again, I'm not saying that I'm completely right on this. I'm saying you better do your homework. You better understand what's going on. They say the type of car you drive, how often, and even how many people are in the car when you drive will also come into play when deciding your score. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't carpool. Minus points. You drive a big SUV that only gets 18 miles to the gallon versus an electric car. I'm sorry, you've lost points. You voted wrong. You lost points. They say, unlike credit scores with a clear method of tabulation, cause and effect, ESG scores depend on a wide variety of factors that most people have yet to consider. In other words, they're making it up as they go until they determine what they want. Depending on where you live, even calculating a personal ESG score can mean giving up your rights to basic privacy. And you're not voting for this, understand? It's just the products that you use and what you're able to buy. They're going to deperson you. And understand something, okay? This is what's so important about this. You have to buy groceries. You have to buy food. Maybe your score only lets you buy rice and a basic soy protein and water. You're not allowed to have ice cream anymore because you've bought too much sugar or you voted the wrong way. Or you can't, I'm sorry, you cannot buy more than 3 articles of clothing this month because what you bought was synthetic material. It wasn't made out of a natural product. This can go so deep and so bad. And I did a little researching on this. I didn't just take Glenn Beck's or some of these investment pages. This is from Bank of America, one of the larger banks that we have here in the United States. Environment and social governance reporting. And here they are. They've got a report center. They've got a fact sheet. This is ESG right here. JP Morgan, an investment site. JP Morgan names new head of ESG for investor relations. So now if you invest, and this is as of September 8 of 2021, your investing firms, they have the information. ESG is available. Visa, Approach to environment, social, and governance. This is Visa's your credit cards. They're lenders. MasterCard, doing well by doing good. Corporate sustainability report. Environmental, social, governance. It's all here. It's all here. BlackRock adds diversity target for U.S. boardrooms. How is BlackRock doing this? Because they're controlling the corporations. Remember, the government prints money, gives it to the banks. The banks give it to BlackRock and all these others. They decide who to invest in. So now BlackRock is deciding what corporations can have on their board. And if corporations say, no, I'm not on board, BlackRock says, then your ESG score is down. And this company will fail. BlackRock's deciding that. And who's giving BlackRock the money? The government. So now the government is deciding who gets the money. They give it to BlackRock. BlackRock and the board of BlackRock and other people like that are deciding on who they do business with. And if you do not have a diverse board, if you do not have enough of the alphabet community or women or minorities on this board, your ESG score will fall off a cliff and you'll no longer get financing or banking as a company. December 14th, from Reuters, top asset manager BlackRock, Inc. on Tuesday said it wants U.S. companies to aim for a board that is 30% diverse and for the first time contains at least one member from an unrepresented group. In new guidelines explaining its priorities for 2022 at portfolio companies posted on its website, the $9.5 trillion asset manager also gave companies new guidance for reporting on climate change, but it said some continued investment in fossil fuels will be needed for now. Together, the update showed the influential New York-based firm taking similar steps to other big asset managers, pressing portfolio companies on ESG considerations. Earlier this month, Goldman Sachs Group said it wants big companies to have at least one director from an unrepresented group, citing growing availability of corporate disclosures showing personal diversity data. It is being put into effect now as we speak. And you don't get a say. You don't get to vote your way out of this. It just is. The global ESG funds inflows in 2021 are up 55% compared to 2020. And you can see the ramp up here of how many billions and trillions are going to be put into this. And here's the thing, guys. You don't get to vote for any of this. And no matter where you are, you're not immune. All right, because a lot of the world bases its dollar amounts on the U.S. dollar. And if the U.S. loses the petrodollar and they decide to use the Chinese petrodollar, China has the same type of credit scores and social scores. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. If you buy products that are unhealthy for you, like a drink or a smoke or something like that, your score goes down. If you're overweight, your score goes down. If you don't exercise enough, your score goes down. If you eat too much meat, your score goes down. If you buy from the wrong company, your score goes down. If you buy materials to defend yourself under the Second Amendment here in the United States, your score goes down. If it goes down enough, you're unpersoned. You're out of society. If you vote for the wrong person, you're out. That's it. So understand this is here. It's already being implemented. It's already going to be in your banks, your vehicle companies, your loan companies. And if you don't believe kind of what Glenn Beck was saying, I noticed this because at the beginning of the bug, I said, you know something, I'm going to sell some of my stocks and stuff. If they're locking down like this over the course of the next couple of years, the stock market's going to fall off a cliff. These small businesses are going to go under. Everything's going to fail. And so I sold some of my assets. And then over the course of the next 2 years, everything continued to do well. Tesla's great. Apple's great. Google's fine. Nike's doing wonderful. Kellogg's Corporation. All these companies are doing great. What I didn't know at the time is that our government here in the United States and in other governments were going to pump trillions of dollars into the economy, basically giving money for people for not working. But at the end of this, the businesses that failed are still gone. The money that was printed out, that inflation is here to stay. But the money eventually will go away. So what do we have? We have the market that is basically run out of this influx of cash. We have a lot of businesses that failed. We have an unemployment rate that is still not recovered back to the pre-lockdown stage. But companies have grown 20, 30% over this time. For me, it doesn't make sense. How are we in the longest bull run in history in the markets, but we've still been climbing? What Glenn Beck says holds true. And I'm not saying that he's right on this stuff, but I am saying you better know what the hell is going on, because something's not right. Something's not working. And I think everything else is a distraction, because if people knew this was coming into use, I think a lot of people would have problems. And it's probably going to be slow. It's going to be slow over maybe the next decade or two. But they will slowly increase this, and you're going to be in trouble. Now, what can you do about this? The only thing I can think of, maybe, is number one, get yourself in a situation where you won't need to get loans. You won't need to, or if you do, look at doing it sooner rather than later. You want a house? You want to get loan for a house or a car? Sooner rather than later. You're not sure where you're going? You better save your cash, your money. Save it and buy things in cash if you can. But again, I mean, it's going to be pretty tough if you're just a young guy that's working a 9-to-5 and barely has 2 nickels to rub together. I don't have all the answers. I can tell you this, though. I was a member of Bank of America for several years. They had my old mortgage. That's where my financing was. I left them, and I left them because of their requirements for me to put fabric over my face every time I walked in their business, even though there wasn't a requirement locally by the law. They, as a private institution, said, no, we're going to ask you to do this. And I said, well, I'm voting with my money, and I pulled my money out. The only thing I can think of to maybe get away from this is find a small local bank, like a credit union or something like that is not a big monopolistic, huge entity, and see if you can put your money with them and ask them about the ESG stuff. But here's the challenge. Maybe they can't get funding soon because they're not on board with the ESG stuff. And maybe they won't get to be a bank anymore if they're not on board with this. I don't know. I don't know where it's going. I don't even know how we fight back against this. I really don't. All I can say is pay attention. Keep your nose to the ground. Watch for this stuff and understand what's coming. Maybe there's nothing we can do. Maybe there's just, maybe this is the future. Maybe this is it. I wish I had better, like, here's how we fight this system. I don't know. I'm genuinely out of ideas. Because no matter where you go in the world, no matter where you try to run away, even if you don't have a problematic government, if this is how banks and this is how lending and this is how credit and this is how corporations and stock investment and manufacturers and suppliers and energy producers and food production, if that's the way this all goes, unless you literally have bought your own piece of land, like Joker is, and you buy a house in cash to put on there, like Joker is, and you get your own solar farm, put up your own solar panels and maybe a wind turbine and things like that, and get a bank of batteries that maybe will last you 10 or 20 years, like Joker is, and maybe try to find out how to grow your own foods and maybe have ducks or other poultry and maybe some goats for dairy products. I don't know if I can't grow sugar. I can't grow wheat, but maybe I can at least have my own way to try to give myself some sustainable protein. But if you're a guy that isn't at your retirement stage in life like I almost am. But here's the thing. Someone in the chat just said, yeah, but you can hunt. No, you can't. How? You can't buy the leads, the pieces of high-speed copper and lead that you need to put into that animal to hunt it, unless you're going to get into trapping and making your own homemade bow and arrow. Like, they will really be able to control everything bought and sold. And so they'll tell you, oh, you have the Second Amendment. You have the right for these things. You just can't buy the little things that you put inside that weapon. I avoid those words because of YouTube, but you can't buy that stuff anymore. So what do you do when you run out of it? What happens if your neighbor hears you that noise coming from your property and decides to report you? And the ESG patrol shows up. I don't know where this goes, guys, but I want you to be aware of it. I want you to know what's going on so you can be prepared. And you can, even if you can't do anything about it, at least you know what's coming down the pipeline, and we go from there. We'll go from there. Guys, again, if you're here on Locals, thank you for your support. I appreciate it very much. If you're on Rumble and or YouTube, join me over on Locals. At least it's behind a paywall, so I feel a little bit safe and protected over here to do my broadcasts. Eventually, again, if YouTube is, like I said, is pushing for laws to change to where they can start shutting people up, it's only a matter of time, I think. So pay attention, know what's going on, guys. Keep your ears to the ground, and hope for the best. That's all we can do at this point. And we'll see you in the next one.